I've been told, is having a large, extended family that lives in a city far, far away from the one that you live in. Now, I imagine that's not true for most of you, or at least I hope it's not true for most of you, but it may be true for some of you. For instance, for those of you who would rather spend spring break anywhere but with family. And if any of this is true for our congregation, then we represent America's feelings about the family pretty well, meaning that we're divided. If we don't have it, we create it, because many of us crave it. Family, the feeling of being known, held, welcomed, accepted, no matter what. Others have it and reject it. The feeling of being known, held, controlled, expected, no matter what. Whether you were brought up in, live in, or have created for yourself a traditional family, or a modern family, or a postmodern family, or are part of a pre-traditional extended family in which everyone lives together in one household, you surely spend time floating along downstream with your family and struggling to swim upstream, rejecting and returning to the current of life we call family. It's a universal condition, because whether our families are whole or broken, despite all our commitments, our compromises and complications, taking into consideration all of our faults and foibles and failures, our families, especially today, I will argue this morning, are full of permutations, promises, and possibilities. There's no doubt or debate that the American family is changing. That, for example, more unmarried couples are raising children, that more gay and lesbian couples are raising children, that more single women are having children, that more people are living together without getting married, that more mothers of young children are working outside of the home, that more people of different races are marrying each other and having children, and that more women are choosing than ever before not to ever have children at all. The facts are undebatable and undebated. The meaning of these facts about the family are hotly contested. Is the family breaking open or falling apart? There are no easy answers, but there are a few easy examples of the changes happening even inside my own family, so I offer a few of those right now. On my husband's side, his sister has now 2 brown children, one from an African-American father and the other from a Hispanic father. So even in Birmingham, Alabama, the Easter table is going to look more like the United Nations than the Old South this Thanksgiving. On my side of the family, my very white, very Jewish cousin from the suburbs of Boston is soon to marry a beautiful, brown, Indian, Muslim woman from Tanzania. The wedding is planned for August. And my very French, very white cousin in Paris is living with a beautiful black Jamaican-American woman. They've been together for 2 years, I think, aren't married yet, but have added weight to the American side of my family overseas so that now Thanksgiving is becoming an annual family event. How does my family feel about the future for these young couples? If I'm honest, well, that's a mixed bag. My family's not unlike our country, also divided. America, it turns out, Americans are divided into 3 more or less equal camps. A third accept, even embrace, the changes as positive. A third reject the changes and think they're already having or will have a negative impact on the American family and our nation. And a third are skeptical or non-committal. Time will tell, they or we say. Is the family breaking open or falling apart? The debates in our country today about family values reinforce familiar divisions between red and blue states, between rural and urban areas, between the rich and the poor. New families, these newer kinds of families, feel like more of a threat in areas where people's futures and their economic success is more uncertain. It makes sense, though, that as the economy shifts and reshapes itself, the shapes of families would shift too, since historically, marriages and families have been primarily economic arrangements created to ensure stability in a society. And here the Greek and the Latin are truly relevant and revealing. For in Greek, the word oikos, which means family, also is the root of the word economy. And in Latin, the word familia, clearly related to family, also can be translated as slave. So it's natural to wonder, what will all these changes mean for our great-grandchildren and for the future of our nation? To help me answer these questions, I called Jan. So I'd like to introduce you to Jan now. I met Jan in the 4th grade. It's an amazing thing to have friends who you met on the swing set during recess, isn't it? She's one of those. These days, Jan is an OBGYN with specialized practices in fertility and menopause. She teaches at Harvard Medical School. Her clinic is associated with Massachusetts General Hospital, and I'm giving you some of her credentials so that you don't think I trust her just because I met her on the swing set at recess in 4th grade. She's currently the founding director of a new clinic associated with Brigham and Women's Hospital, and a new clinic that will specialize in women's health in midlife. She is pretty hot stuff, and her friends, we like to call her the sex doctor, because she knows an awful lot at this point in her life about hormones and couples and making babies, and I've discovered about what family is really about. Since she's immersed in the creation of the most modern families we know of today, I hope talking to her would help me, and also us, dig below the surface of the current debates about family values, so we can move closer to the core of what family really means. So I learned a few things about the newer, and here's one of the simpler ways to have a baby. This is the essence. You need an egg and a sperm and a woman who agrees to serve as a gestational carrier to end up with a baby. No one has to have sex. No one is necessarily related genetically. That's the simplest model. Really, I learned, surprisingly so, that there really aren't any test tubes. Even Jan didn't know where that came from. Eggs and sperm and embryos can all be frozen and then stored. Eggs are the trickiest to handle and preserve. Sometimes friends and family members donate their genetic material to other friends and family, but one can also make some money today selling one's own genetic material. Jan assured me that everything is meticulously labeled. Thank you for the giggle. One would hope that everything is meticulously labeled, if you see my point. The basic rule when you're making your family this way is that the egg donor and the gestational carrier have to be two different women. Otherwise, even if the carrier has agreed to give the baby away, once she's given birth, if she should happen to change her mind, and it's also her egg, the law would recognize her as the mother. So even the simple model gets complicated pretty quickly. And of course, often parents do care that the children they are creating are genetically related to them. They want them to be. So talking to Jan reminded me of a story from a long, long time ago in my own life. It happened about 30 years ago. My friend Pam decided she was ready to get pregnant. She was living then on the South Texas border. Her wife was living in Minneapolis and had already given birth to a daughter. She had conceived that child using the sperm of a friend. Pam decided to try a different method. Midway through her menstrual cycle, on a day she knew she was fertile, she drove across the border, went to a bar, and picked up a young man. A handsome one, I might add. She had a few drinks with him at the bar, asked him some questions. Actually, she asked him all kinds of probing questions about his family and his health and his work situation. As she listened to his answers, she was listening very intently and assessing his physical, his psychological, and his mental health. Figuring his answers were probably pretty honest since he didn't know that he was being interviewed for his fitness as a biological father. Once satisfied that he had passed her informal test, she made it clear that she was ready for more than talk. When Pam drove back across the border to the United States that night. She was pregnant with a boy, her son, who is now a young man. Pam's family is distinctly different than the traditional American family, which used to consist of a man, a woman, and 2.2 children. There are questions that emerge from this story, of course, and concerns, mostly about the rights of the dad in this case. I'm going to let you sit with those, though, this morning, and tell you another story. Not too long ago, Jan told me she saw an old friend from medical school at a reunion. Her medical school classmate is Asian, and his husband is Jewish European. And they had 2 gorgeous kids with them. After the hugs, and as they started catching up on each other's lives, Jan found herself staring at the kids. She couldn't stop staring because she was trying to figure out why the kids looked like both parents. Turns out, for each kid, they had used sperm from one dad and an egg from the sister of the other dad. So both children were a genetic mix of both fathers. So smart, Jan said. No worries about those children being loved and cared for in the long run. Now, before making those siblings or those babies, a team of doctors and lawyers and social workers and psychologists meet to work through the ethical implications together. Some say, and maybe some of you are thinking, hold on a second. That woman, Jan, she's playing God. Is that okay? At least she plays God by committee, which any good Unitarian should approve of. And the fact is, the committee's practices and policies have evolved over time. For example, back in the beginning of in-vitro fertilization, or IVF, a majority of doctors only served people who needed the procedure because of medical indications. Indications like they would pass on a genetically inherited disease if they used their own egg or sperm, so they were permitted to use other people's eggs and sperm. See? Until about 10 years ago, when a couple came to Jan because they could not conceive on their own, but there weren't any medical complications. So there was no reason and no precedent for using IVF. Rather than play God alone, which Jan defines playing God as having her values determine the outcome in other people's lives. The case went to this ethics committee. The experts talked and talked and talked, as experts are prone to do, until a consistently key player on the team, a social worker, said, "Tell me what this means for the child." And with that one question, the whole conversation shifted from a focus on the reproductive technology, 1 egg plus 1 sperm plus 1 uterus equals 1 baby, usually, and turned into a conversation about a child and a family. And as they talked, a picture emerged of 2 devoted parents willing to use their financial resources to have a child with whom they could feel even more closely connected because there would be a direct genetic link. And suddenly, it was a no-brainer. They finished the meeting quickly. Jan ran out of the conference room and went straight to call the parents back. "You're not going to believe it. I hardly can believe it," she said. Once the conversation shifted to the question of what's best for the child, to the question of how to make more love and make love stronger in the world, it was a slam dunk. The clinic's protocols changed then, as did the norm around the whole country. Today, single women who are running short on time, meaning they're in their mid-30s, have several options if they can come up with the money. Adoption is one. Using a sperm donor is another. Coming up with a combination of egg and sperm and carrier is another. Which begs the question, is there a right way to create a family? And if there is, does that mean there's also a wrong way to create a family? And if not, what does that teach us about what it means to be a family? I had my babies the old-fashioned way, but the lessons I learned haven't been any different, really, from what I see postmodern parents learning and teaching us today. I remember being very, very worried when I was pregnant with our second child. I loved our first daughter so much. I couldn't imagine loving another baby just as much. And I was worried that if I let myself love this new baby, there'd be less love, maybe not even enough love left for the child we already had. I felt like I was stuck in a bind. Thankfully, I've always had good friends, and finally, one of them told me that I wouldn't be taking love away from anyone. I'd just be giving the daughter we already had one more person to love unconditionally, and I'd be giving her an extra person who would love her unconditionally too. Hearing that helped a lot. And despite the years of fighting and hurt feelings and drama my girls have gone through, it has turned out to be true. And I learned something about love in the process. I learned that there's always more of it. You don't have to hoard it or save it. It's not a resource we have to restrict our use of. It's actually the opposite. Love is a force that replenishes itself. So using it up just makes more of it. We're not supposed to be thrifty with love. We're supposed to be extravagant when love is the currency. Because the more of it you share, the more of it is available. It's the original renewable energy, the perfect product for our times. After talking to Jan, I'm convinced, in response to this question, is the family breaking open or falling apart? I'm convinced that more love is actually emerging into the world from the breaking apart of the nuclear family the way we once knew it, like in a nuclear reaction, when the old core is split open and new energy is released. Because from biblical times until very recently, women have depended on men to make enough money so that they and their children would be cared for and protected, and have often been treated like slaves in their own homes. And men have depended on women to bear and raise their children, to provide labor for the family business and an heir. Families have created economies, and families have owned and controlled their members. But that ground is breaking open beneath our feet today. And as a result, women, even though they are still paid less on the dollar, a majority of women today make as much money or more money than their boyfriends, husbands, brothers, and lovers, even more than their fathers. And so women are becoming stronger and more independent day by day. So, okay, Barbara, you might be thinking, what does this mean for the children, along with our social worker? It's a good question. Is it really smart for us, with all our familiar and very human limitations and temptations, to try to make the world the way we want it to be, rather than accept it the way it is? Is it really smart or even okay for us to play God in these ways? For us to allow our own values to determine the outcome of other people's lives? I have another story to tell you. It's about a woman who tried for years and years to conceive with every technique known not to man, but to Jan. Implantation after implantation led to miscarriage after miscarriage. Virile sperm and fertile eggs couldn't seem to get a life started. Until finally, this couple told Jan that they were ready to adopt. Jan waits patiently as clients move through their grief and denial and depression, their anger and apathy, their hope, their resistance, and their acceptance. And when they shift direction, she celebrates their decision with them. In this case, she also reminded the couple that there was one more frozen embryo left. So even as they filled out their home study forms and prepared to adopt, they had that last embryo implanted. On the day they got the call from the adoption agency telling them the baby was ready to be picked up, Susan started bleeding again. The old sadness swept through her, but this time it didn't sting as much or linger as long. We have a new baby waiting for us, she thought. I can bear this loss one more time. We're about to become a family. Fast forward through the adoption, and 2 months later, with a baby in her arms, Susan had an ultrasound and discovered that the miscarriage hadn't happened, and she was still pregnant. Susan has 2 children today, one genetically hers, one not. They're both dearly loved. Love is never an either or. And whether we want the power or not, we have it. Still, the degree of control people feel they have over their lives today can and does sometimes make even me feel uncomfortable. So I was happy to learn that Jan's clinic doesn't offer sex selection to parents, although I also learned that other clinics in Boston do. So I asked her why not. To be clear, sex selection would be the choice to dispose of male embryos and only implant female embryos if for some reason or other you only wanted to be the parent of a girl, or vice versa. Everyone on our team, she said, from the docs to the technicians, needs to be comfortable with what we're doing. We are all ages, all genders, all ethnicities, and come from many faiths and no faith at all. All of us weren't comfortable with sex selection, and after talking it through, we realized why. It wasn't about an aversion to playing God, because we do that all the time. It was a misunderstanding about love that bothered her staff and bothered them enough to say no. When you commit to love and to care for someone, when you commit to being a parent, you do it without conditions, Jan said. What if the child is born with autism? Or what if the child is born blind? What would the parents do then? If someone thinks the gender of their child is a determining factor as to whether or not they can or will love it, they don't know enough yet about the nature of life and love to be a parent. It's just not in the best interest of the child. They all finally agreed. In a world as broken as ours is and feels sometimes, with endless wars around the world, with children going to bed hungry right here in Tulsa every night, with racial tensions leading today to more violence in our cities, and a nation divided into red and blue states, there's something I've learned from Jan that I hope is relevant in your own lives. None of us can avoid the fact that our values and how we live out those values actually does determine the outcome of other people's lives each and every day. Whether we want that much power or not, we have it. But if we remember that making more love in the world is the bottom line, not profit, not even a child, then we are doing God's work while we're here. Even the families that fight hard for their own genes to be passed on learn, often despite themselves, that their capacity to love is much larger than they thought it was. Jan's team knows that they're doing more than creating babies. They know they're playing God or being God because they're making more love. A powerful kind of love that transcends boundaries of belonging based on genes and gender, race, physical or mental ability. Jan and her colleagues spend their days teaching the rest of us that when we decide to love each other and commit to each other, that's when we become family. Real family. Known, held, welcome, accepted, no matter what. So if you don't like the family you made, or the family you were given, or if your family was taken away from you one way or another, I say you might find the family you've always been looking for right here. Tamara called us an All Souls family a little earlier, because in the end, it's not about the genetic material, because right from the beginning, we've really been, and we truly are, all related. These days, it's just starting to show a little bit more. Amen.
Thanks for tuning in online. We are so pleased with all the different people who have been tuning in from all over the country and all over the world to our ministry and what we're doing at All Souls here in Tulsa. if you have a chance to send me an email or connect with me in some way, let me know what you're finding, why you tune in, and what you're getting out of it. I would love to hear from you. I'm always pleased when I get messages from different people who tell me all kinds of things about the impact of All Souls Tulsa's ministry on them and their lives and their families. And if you get a chance to make a gift to support this ministry, to become a partner, we would love to partner with you and have you be a friend of the church and somebody who is actually supporting us to create this congregation and the world that we're trying to create together. You can be a part of it, and every gift of every amount makes a difference. We really appreciate your support.